Imagine finding yourself inside a 40-ton steel box when a tungsten dart traveling at over 1,500 meters per second punches through the armor. In the fraction of a second between impact and your final thought, your body will experience forces and traumas that most medical professionals have never witnessed and pray they never will. What happens in those microseconds has been documented by battlefield medics, autopsy reports, and the grim testimony of the rare survivors who watched their crewmates die beside them. This is not a story about heroism or tactics. This is about what a kinetic penetrator does to flesh, bone, and organs when physics and warfare collide inside a confined metal space. Throughout military history, from the first anti-tank rifles of the Great War to modern armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds, the goal has remained the same: defeat the armor and neutralize the crew inside. But here is the thing. Neutralize is a sanitized military term that conceals some of the most horrific deaths imaginable. When we talk about crew casualties, we are talking about human bodies subjected to extreme trauma that occurs faster than the nervous system can register pain, yet slowly enough that some crew members remain conscious through the initial impact, aware of what is happening to them and their comrades in those final terrible moments. Let's start with what actually happens in the first millisecond after penetration. When a kinetic energy penetrator, such as a modern armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot round, strikes a tank, it is not moving through the armor like a bullet through paper. The projectile itself experiences tremendous forces. Modern penetrators are typically made from depleted uranium or tungsten alloy, materials chosen because they maintain their structure under enormous stress, while the armor they attack deforms and fails. As the penetrator breaks through, the armor does not simply open a clean hole. The interior surface of the armor plate violently fragments, sending razor-sharp metal shards into the crew compartment at velocities exceeding the speed of sound. This phenomenon, called spalling, is the first killer. Medical reports from Korean War tank casualties described wounds that initially baffled American military doctors. Crew members recovered from knocked-out M26 Pershing and M46 Patton tanks showed injuries that appeared as if they had been attacked by dozens of separate projectiles, yet only a single anti-tank round had penetrated their vehicle. What they were seeing was the result of spalling. These supersonic metal fragments, some as small as a coin, others as large as a human hand, tear through the crew compartment in an expanding cone of destruction. Unlike bullets or shrapnel from conventional explosives, these fragments are often still white-hot from the friction of the armor being torn apart. A gunner positioned directly in line with the penetration faces the full force of this metal storm. The fragments do not discriminate between cloth, flesh, or bone. British Army medical officers examining casualties from Centurion tanks hit during the Yom Kippur War noted that some gunners had been struck by so many fragments simultaneously that their bodies resembled victims of sustained close-range automatic weapons fire. The difference is that these were not rifle rounds, but pieces of their own tank's armor traveling at Mach 2. One Israeli medical examiner documented a case in which a gunner's ribcage had been penetrated by 17 separate metal fragments, several of which passed completely through the body and embedded themselves in the opposite wall of the tank. But the spalling is just the beginning. Behind those fragments comes the penetrator itself, if it has not shattered during penetration. A depleted uranium penetrator that maintains its integrity after punching through can traverse the entire crew compartment. We are talking about a projectile with the density of gold moving at approximately 5 times the speed of sound through a space barely larger than a walk-in closet. The hydrostatic shock alone, the pressure wave that radiates through fluid-filled tissues, causes catastrophic internal damage. Soviet tanker training manuals from the 1980s, obtained after the Cold War, included medical documentation of crew casualties that described ruptured organs, eyes, and eardrums in crew members who were not even directly struck by the penetrator, victims purely of the overpressure wave. On top of this, there is the thermal effect. Depleted uranium penetrators have a property that makes them particularly devastating. They are pyrophoric, meaning they ignite on impact. As the penetrator erodes against the armor and then travels through the crew compartment, it is burning. When this white-hot material enters the crew space while burning at temperatures that can reach 6,000 degrees Celsius, both from the penetrator and the armor it just defeated, it does not just cause burns in the conventional sense. It flash heats the air itself. Crew members positioned near the penetration path experience what military medicine calls thermal inhalation injury. But that clinical term does not capture the reality. They are breathing superheated air that instantly sears their throat, trachea, and lungs. Death from thermal inhalation is neither quick nor painless. Soviet medical records from Afghanistan included cases where crew members survived the initial penetration, but died within minutes from respiratory failure. Their lungs essentially cooked from the inside. If all this was not enough, here is what happens when a penetrator strikes something inside the tank. Ammunition storage, fuel tanks, hydraulic reservoirs, batteries. Each of these represents a secondary explosion or fire hazard. When a penetrator strikes an ammunition rack, the results are instantaneous and total. The technical term is catastrophic kill, and it means exactly what it sounds like. The turret of a T-72 weighs approximately 12 tons. During the Gulf War, American forces advancing through Kuwait found T-72 tanks with their turrets thrown 20 or 30 meters from the hull. The explosive force required to do that does not leave survivors. Soviet-era T-series tanks stored ammunition in a carousel autoloader directly beneath the turret crew. This design choice, made to reduce crew requirements and the tank profile, meant that when that ammunition cooked off, the crew had zero chance of survival. American medical personnel examining destroyed Iraqi T-72 tanks found, as documented in official after-action reports, minimal remains of crew members. In many cases, the explosive force was so great that biological material was atomized or vaporized entirely. Even in tanks with more survivable designs, with blowout panels and compartmentalized ammunition storage, the crew faces terrible dangers when secondary systems are compromised. Hydraulic fluid, under tremendous pressure to power the turret and gun elevation systems, can spray throughout the crew compartment when lines are severed. This fluid is highly flammable. Several American tankers from Desert Storm recalled incidents where penetrators that did not cause immediate crew deaths instead ruptured hydraulic lines, covering the crew in fluid that ignited moments later from hot metal fragments or electrical sparks. One Marine tanker described hearing his loader screaming for only a few seconds before the sound stopped. The loader had been drenched in hydraulic fluid when a near-miss shrapnel strike cut a hydraulic line, and when the fluid ignited, he burned to death in his station, while the remaining crew, also covered in fluid, frantically tried to escape before they shared his fate. Besides the immediate physical trauma, there is the psychological dimension that is often overlooked in discussions of armored warfare casualties. A few crew members who've survived catastrophic penetrations describe a phenomenon that psychiatrists working with tank veterans have termed temporal dislocation. The human brain processes visual information at a certain rate, roughly 24 frames per second, for conscious awareness. But the events during a penetration occur in microseconds. What survivors describe is a disjointed awareness, seeing the flash of light from the penetration, then suddenly being outside the tank with no memory of exiting, no memory of the intervening seconds when they somehow moved through the tank and out the hatch. What happened in those seconds? Their crewmates died. They witnessed it. Their brain recorded it. But the trauma was so extreme that conscious memory could not form. Some of these survivors, days or weeks later, begin having vivid nightmares as their subconscious mind slowly releases suppressed memories of what they saw in those missing seconds. Position within the tank dramatically affects survival and the nature of injuries sustained. Commanders positioned in the turret, with their heads often outside the cupola, have arguably the best chance of survival if they are outside the primary cone of spalling and penetration. However, they are also vulnerable to the turret being blown off the hull when ammunition cooks off. Drivers, positioned lower and forward in the hull, can sometimes survive turret penetrations that kill the rest of the crew, but they face their own particular horror. Trapped in the driver's compartment with limited visibility and limited awareness of what is happening behind them, they may only realize their crew is dead when they attempt to communicate and receive no response, or worse, when they smell burning flesh. Soviet tanker memoirs from veterans of the Great Patriotic War include accounts from drivers who survived the war but were haunted by memories of driving their tank to safety while their crew burned behind them, unable to exit or help, forced to simply keep driving until they reached friendly lines. Loaders and gunners typically face the worst immediate odds. Positioned near the breech of the main gun and adjacent to ammunition storage, they are in the most lethal zone of the tank. A penetration from the front that defeats the turret armor will send Spalling directly into their positions. German tanker casualty statistics from the Eastern Front showed that loaders had the highest mortality rate of any crew position, followed closely by gunners. The reason is that they were stationed in the most confined part of an already confined space, surrounded by ammunition and fuel that could explode. Recovery crews tasked with removing casualties from knocked-out tanks developed protocols specifically for dealing with loader and gunner remains, because the violence of the deaths often meant remains were intermingled with the mechanical components of the tank itself. Let's talk about something most people don't know. Different types of anti-tank ammunition create distinctly different patterns of injury. A kinetic energy penetrator relies on pure velocity and density to punch through armor, and then causes damage through spalling, penetrator fragments, and thermal effects. Shape-charged warheads, known as high-explosive anti-tank, or heat rounds, work on an entirely different principle. When a high-explosive anti-tank round detonates against armor, it forms what is called a Monroe jet, a stream of superplastically deformed metal moving at velocities up to 10 kilometers per second. This jet, thin as a finger, but carrying enormous energy, burns through armor not by mechanical force, but through hydrodynamic penetration. The armor essentially behaves like a fluid under the extreme pressure. When this jet enters the crew compartment, it is still carrying tremendous thermal and kinetic energy. The jet itself is a stream of liquefied copper traveling at roughly 30 times the speed of sound. A human body in the path of this jet does not just suffer a penetrating wound. The jet flash vaporizes tissue and bone, creating a channel of destruction, often several centimeters in diameter. British Army medical reports from casualties of RPG-7 attacks in Northern Ireland and later in Afghanistan documented that crew members struck directly by the jet showed wounds that appeared cauterized, the extreme heat of the penetration having simultaneously destroyed tissue and sealed blood vessels. Death from jet penetration is typically instant when the jet passes through the torso or head, but crew members struck in limbs by jets that had mostly expended their energy penetrating the armor could survive with horrific burns and traumatic amputations. The psychological trauma on surviving crew members is something military psychologists have studied extensively since World War II, a phenomenon documented among Sherman tank crews who survived knockouts was called, informally, the 30-second rule. If you could get out of a burning Sherman within 30 seconds of being hit, you had a chance. After 30 seconds, the fire would typically spread to block escape routes, or the ammunition would cook off. Survivors described those 30 seconds as an eternity. One American tanker, who survived 3 separate tank knockouts during the campaign in Northwest Europe, described the third incident in his memoir. His tank was hit, the gunner killed instantly by spalling, the loader severely wounded. As driver, he had to get himself and the loader out, but the loader's leg was trapped under the gun's recoil mechanism. He describes spending what felt like several minutes trying to free his comrade, while fire spread in the turret, knowing that at any moment the ammunition could explode. In reality, it was less than 15 seconds before he had to make the choice to leave the loader behind or die with him. He chose to live. The loader's screaming followed him out of the tank and haunted him for the remaining 60 years of his life. Modern tanks incorporate features designed to improve survivability. They include blowout panels for ammunition storage, spall liners on the interior armor, and automated fire suppression systems. These measures do save lives. An M1 Abrams with isolated ammunition storage in the turret bustle has a significantly better survival rate after penetration than Soviet-designed tanks with carousel autoloaders. Even so, when a modern anti-tank missile such as the Javelin attacks in top attack mode, striking the thin roof armor above the crew compartment, The physics of penetration and spalling still apply. The armor can be torn apart, and fragments still fly through the crew space. The difference in modern Western designs is that ammunition might not cook off, giving wounded crew members who survive the initial penetration a chance to escape before secondary explosions kill them. That is progress, but it is cold comfort when the injuries we see include severe burns, traumatic amputations, and massive internal trauma from overpressure and spalling. Medical examiners and battlefield recovery teams face unique challenges when dealing with tank casualties. Unlike infantry casualties, where remains are typically intact and identifiable, tank crew casualties often require DNA identification because visual identification is impossible. The combination of extreme trauma, fire, and in many cases secondary explosions means that human remains may be fragmentary or commingled. American Graves registration personnel during the Korean War developed a grim system for documenting tank casualties. When a tank was knocked out with crew inside, recovery teams would document the position of what remained at each crew station to assist in identification. In many catastrophic kill situations where the ammunition had cooked off, remains from different crew members would be collected together because separation was impossible. These would be interred as group burials. What makes this particularly hard for families is the uncertainty. When a tank is hit hard enough to cause a catastrophic kill, there often is not enough evidence to determine exactly how or when each crew member died. Did they die instantly from spalling? Were they conscious when the fire started? Did they have time to feel fear? These are questions that haunt the families of tank casualties, and that military casualty notification officers are trained to gently deflect. Because the truth, documented in classified medical examiner reports and battlefield recovery logs, would provide no comfort. I don't know about you, but examining these medical and historical records leaves me with a profound respect for anyone who has served in armored units. The courage required to climb into a tank is enormous. You do it knowing that if you are hit, the best you can hope for is instant death. The worst is being conscious for every second as fire and fragmentation kill you. That takes a special kind of bravery that I am not sure I possess. Modern tankers, despite all the improvements in armor, active protection systems, and survivability features, still face these risks. A tank remains what it has always been: a steel box filled with fuel, ammunition, and human beings. When someone with the right weapon decides to open that box, the results are as terrible today as they were 80 years ago. If you find this as fascinating and disturbing as I did while researching it, please subscribe. We cover the dark realities of warfare that most channels will not touch. We have more videos coming on the brutal truths behind military equipment and the people who operated them. What is your opinion on this? Does knowing these realities change how you view armored warfare? After hearing what actually happens to the human body during a kinetic penetration, do you think modern recruiting efforts that glamorize tank warfare are being honest about the risks these young men and women face? If this kind of content interests you, the dark truths behind military history that textbooks leave out, please subscribe. We are constantly uncovering these forgotten stories and brutal realities that shaped modern warfare. Let me know in the comments what you think.